Okay, this is Tobacco Road by Erskine and Caldwell, Chapter 7. Jeter did not go down to the coal chute to see Lob. Neither did he go to the house to speak to Pearl. There were always well-developed plans in Jeter's mind for the things he intended doing, but somehow he never got around to doing them. One day led to the next, and it was much more easy to say he would wait until tomorrow. When that day arrived, he invariably postponed action until a more convenient time. Things had been going along in that easy way for almost a lifetime now. Nevertheless, he was again getting ready to burn off the fields and plow the land. He wanted to raise a crop of cotton. Having an operation performed on Ellie Mae's lip was one of those things that Jeter had been waiting for 15 years to do. Several times each year, he had said he was going to take her to the doctor in Augusta. When he did not make an effort to take her there, he usually never got any further than the store at the crossroads, where something was certain to come up that caused him to change his plans. In the course of all those years, he had actually reached Augusta 2 or 3 times with the sole intention of having the operation performed, but it had always resulted in something coming to his mind at the last minute that he thought he needed more than Ellie Mae needed an operation. Once it was plow lines that he could not do without another day, even though he had no mule to use them on. Another time it was snuff he had to have, and so he had stopped at the store and spent what little money he had, and they returned home with nothing accomplished. Ellie Mae did not protest. She could not have been made to believe that her hair lip could have been sewn together in such a way that only the faintest suggestion of a scar would remain. She had become so accustomed to the gaping narrow opening in her mouth that she could not believe that it was possible for her to look any different from the way she always had. On those very few occasions when Jeter had made preparations to go to the hospital, and when he had talked to Ellie Mae about going there, she would stand behind the corner of the house or behind one of the many chinaberry trees scattered around the house and grin. The Lesters had spoken so frequently about her hair lip that she had come to believe that Jeter's proposal to have it operated upon was merely another way of making fun of her appearance. She remained hidden behind the house or a chinaberry tree until the subject of the conversation was changed. It only came out where she could be seen when she was certain nothing more would be said about her. "It ain't no sin to look like that, Ellie Mae," Jeter had told her. "You came into the world that way from God, and that's the way. He intended for you to look. Sometimes I think maybe it would be a sin to change it, because that would be doing over something he made." "Well, all I gotta say," Ada had stated, "is that it's a shame he didn't make dude with the slit instead of Ellie Mae. A gal ain't got no business looking like that. Women ain't good for nothing but to marry and work for men, and when one of them has that kind of thing on her, there ain't no man I ever heard of who's gonna use her. If I was dude who had the slip, it wouldn't make no difference at all. Men ain't noticed as much in the face as women is. No way." Once, when Ellie Mae went to the schoolhouse several years before to enter the 1st grade, she returned home before noon and never went back again. The teacher told her she was too old to attend school with little children, but the real reason for sending her home was because the other boys and girls laughed at her hair lip so much they could not study their lessons. So Ellie Mae came back home and never went again. Dude had never attended school either. Jeter said he was needed at home to help him do the work. But if Jeter was indifferent towards Ellie Mae's need for an operation, there was one thing in his life he tried to do with all the strength in his mind and body. The one thing was the farming of the land. There had been scarcely a moment in his life during the past 6 or 7 years when he was not thinking about it and trying to discover some way by which he could raise cotton. When Captain John had moved to Augusta 7 years before, it seemed to be the end of all farming as far as Jeter was concerned, but he would not give up the struggle to break the land each spring and plant cotton. Jeter could never think of the loss of his land and goods as anything but a man-made calamity. He sometimes said it was partly his own fault, but he believed steadfastly that his position had been brought about by other people. He did not blame Captain John to the same extent that he blamed others. However, Captain John had always treated him fairly and had done more for him than any other man. When Jeter had overbought at the stores in Fuller, Captain John let him continue, and he never put a limit to the credit allowed. But the end soon came. There was no longer any profit raising cotton under the captain's acquainted system, and he abandoned the farm and moved to Augusta. Rather than attempt to show his tenants how to conform to the newer and more economical methods of modern agriculture, which he thought would have been an impossible task from the start, he sold the stock and implements and moved away. An intelligent employment of his land, stocks, and lineaments would have enabled Jeter and scores of others who had become dependent upon Captain John to raise crops for food and crops to be sold at a profit. Cooperative and corporate farming would have saved them all. Jeter was now reduced to painful poverty. His means of livelihood had been taken away and he was slowly starving. The entire section of land around him had originally been owned by Jeter's grandfather. 75 years before, it had been the most desirable soil in the entire west central part of Georgia. His grandfather had cleared the greater part of the plantation for the production of tobacco. The soil at the time was better suited to the cultivation of tobacco than to that of any other crop. It was a sandy loam, and the ridge was high and dry. Hundreds of tumble-down tobacco barns, chinked with clay, could still be found on what was left of the plantation. Some of them were still standing, but most of them were rotten and fallen down. The road on which Jeter lived was the original tobacco road his grandfather had made. It was about 15 miles long and extended in a southeasterly direction from the foothills of the Piedmont, where the sandhills started and ended up on the bluffs at the river. The road had been used for rolling of tobacco casks, large hogsheads in which the leaf had been packed after being cured and seasoned in the clay-chinked barns. Thousands of hogsheads had been rolled along the crest of the ridge which connected the chain of sandhills, and they made a smooth, firm road the entire distance of 15 miles. Sometimes the casks had been pushed by gangs of Negroes to the river steamboats. Other times they were pulled by the team of mules, but always the crest of the ridge was followed, because when off it, the hogsheads would have rolled downhill into the creeks, which ran parallel with the road to the river, and once wet, the leaf would have been ruined and worthless. After 75 years, the tobacco still remained, and while in many places it was beginning to show signs of washing away, its depressions and hollows made a pertinent contour that would remain as long as the sandhills. There were scores of tobacco roads on the western side of the Savannah Valley, some only a mile or so long, others extending as far back as 25 or 35 miles into the foothills of the Piedmont. Anyone walking cross-country would more likely find as many as 6 or 8 in a day's hike. The region, topographically, was like a palm leaf. The savanna was the stem, large at the bottom and gradually spreading out into veins at the top. On the side of the valley, the creeks ran down like the depressions in the palm leaf, while between them lay the ridges of sandhills like seams, and on the crests of ridges were the tobacco roads. Jeter's father had inherited about one half of the original Lester plantation, and approximately half of that had quickly slipped through his fingers. He could not pay the taxes to begin with, and much of it had been sold to satisfy the county's claims from year to year. The remainder he farmed the best he could. He raised cotton exclusively, but because of the sandy loam, he found it necessary to use more and more fertilizer each year. The loose sandy soil would not hold the guano during the hard summer rains, and it was washed away before the roots of the plants could utilize it. By the time Jeter was old enough to work in the fields, the land had become such a great item of expense that most of it was allowed to grow up into pines. The soil had become depleted by the constant raising of cotton year after year, and it was impossible to secure a yield of more than 1/4 of a bale to the acre. More and more guano was poured into the fields, and faster was it washed away through the loose sandy soil before the cotton plants were able to reach it. When his father died, what was left of Lester lands and debts was willed to Jeter. The first thing that happened was foreclosure of the mortgage. In order to satisfy the creditors, all the timber was cut, and another large portion of the land was sold. 2 years later, Jeter found himself so heavily in debt that he did not own a single acre of land or even a tenant house after the claims had been settled. The man who purchased the farm at sheriff's sale was Captain John Harmon. Captain John allowed Jeter and his family to live in one of the houses and to work for him on shares. That was 10 years before the World War. From that time forward, Jeter had sunk each year into poverty more bitter than what of the year before. The culmination had apparently been reached when Captain John sold the mules and other stock and moved to Augusta. There was then to be no more 2/3 share of a year's labor coming to Jeter, and there was never again to be credit for food and snuff and other necessities at the store in Fuller. With him, Captain John took his credit. Jeter did not know what to do. Without snuff and food, life seemed not worth living any longer. By that time, most of the children had left home and gone to Augusta and elsewhere. Jeter did not know where all of them were now. There had been 17 children born to Ada and him. 5 had died, and the 12 living were scattered in all directions. Only Ellie Mae and Dude were still at home. Pearl was only 2 miles away, but she never came to the house to see Jeter and Ada, and they had never been to see her. The children who had died were buried in different parts of the farm. The land had been plowed over since their death, and As the graves were unmarked, Noah would have known where to look for them if he had wanted to find them. With the exception of Jude and Nellie Mae, all the children were married. Jeter thought he knew where Tom was, but he was not certain. He had heard in the stores in Fuller that Tom, who was the oldest boy, was running a cross-tie camp in the next county at a place about 20 miles away. No one had the slightest idea where most of the others were, nor if all of them were still living. Lizzie Bell had been the last one to leave home. She had gone away several years before, saying she was going to work in a cotton mill across the river from Augusta. There were 10 or more cotton mills in Horse Creek Valley, but she had not said which one she was going to work in. Jeter had been told that she was still there, and that she was married and had 7 children already. He did not know if it was true or not because neither he nor Ada ever received a letter. There were times when Jeter became lonesome without all his children around him, and he wished some of them would come back to see him or write letters. He wondered then, too, if it were possible that they had sent him letters he had not received. There was no rural delivery route on the Tobacco Road, and he did not have a mailbox. But he had said several times that he was someday going to the post office in Fuller to ask if there was a letter from him and Lizzie Bell or Clara or Tom or any of the others. He knew he would have to get somebody to read the letters to him if he did hear from them, because neither he nor Ada had ever learned to read. He had been in Fuller hundreds of times since he first thought of asking at the post office for a letter, but he had not yet got around to making the inquiry there. Someday he hoped to be able to go over to the Burke County and see Tom. He had been planning a trip there for several years, but first it was the old automobile that had prevented him from getting started. Then it was bad weather and muddy roads that held him back. The trip to see Tom had been planned for 2 purposes. He wanted to see his son, of course, and to talk to him, but his main object in going was because he believed Tom would give him some money regularly when he found out how poor he was and how badly he and Ada needed snuff and food. From the things Jeter had heard in the stores in Fuller, he knew Tom could afford to give him a few dollars every week. The people said that Tom owned 50 or 60 mules and twice that many oxen, and that he received a lot of money for the cross ties he sold the railroad. Jeter heard that several times in Fuller, and he knew it must be true. He could not believe that Tom would refuse to help him at Ada when he told his son how poor they were. Now that winter was passing, Jeter hoped to be able to make the trip sometime that summer. The roads would not be muddy then, and the days would be much longer. The passing of winter and the slow growth of early spring had its usual effect on Jeter. The warm late February days had kindled in him once more the desire to farm the land. Each year at that season he made a new effort to break the ground and to find the means of buying seed cotton and guano on credit from the merchants in Fuller. His attempts had always ended in the refusal of anybody to give him a dime's worth of credit. However, he burned a field here and a field there on the farm each spring, getting the growth of broom sedge off the land so it would be ready to plow in case someone did lend him a mule and give him a little seed cotton and guano. Each year for the past 6 or 7, it had been the same. There was an inherited love of the land in Jeter that all his disastrous experiences with farming had failed to take away. He had lived his whole life there on a small remnant of the Lester plantation, and while he realized it was not his legally, he felt that he would die if he had to move away from it. He would not even consider going elsewhere to live, even though he were offered a chance to work for another man's farm on shares. Even to move to Augusta and work in cotton mills would be impossible for him. The restless movement of the other tenant farmers to the mills had never had any effect on Jeter. Working in cotton mills might be all right for some people, he said, but as for him, he would rather die of starvation than leave the land. In 7 years, his views on the subject had not been altered, and if anything, he was more determined than ever to remain where he was at all costs. When Lizzie Bell left, Ada had said she wanted to move to Augusta too, but Jeter would not listen to her argument. There had never been a time when he wanted to leave the land and live in a mill village. City ways ain't God-given, Jeter said, shaking his head. It wasn't intended for a man with the smell of the land in him to live in a mill in Augusta. Maybe it's all right for some people to do that, but God never meant for me to do it. He put me on the land to start with, and I ain't leaving it. I'd feel just like a chicken with his head cut off living shut up in a mill all the time. You talk like an old fool, Ada said angrily. It's a whole lot better to live in the mills than it is to stay out here on the Tobacco Road and starve to death. Up there I could get me all the snuff I needed. Down here I ain't never got enough to call me. God is aiming to provide for us, he answered her. I'm getting ready right now to receive his bounty. I expect it to come most any time now. He won't let us stay here and starve. He'll send us some snuff and rations pretty soon. I've been a God-fearing man all my life, and he ain't gonna let me suffer no more. You just sit there and see. This time, 10 years from now, you'll be just like you is now if you live that long. Even the children has got more sense than you has. Didn't they go off and work in the mills as soon as they was big enough? They had better sense than to sit here and wait for you to put food in their empty mouths and bellies. They knowed you'd never do anything about it except talk. If I wasn't so old, I'd go up to the mills right now and make me some money. The Lord sends me every misery he can think of just to try my soul. He must be aiming to do something powerful, big for me, because he sure tests me hard. I reckon if he figures if I can put up with my own people, I can stand to fight back at the devil. Ada said. If he don't hurry up and do something about it, it will be too late. My poor stomach gives me powerful pain all day long when I ain't got the snuff to calm it. All right, this is chapter 8. Here we go. There was nothing Jeter could find to do in the sandhills that would pay him even a few cents a day for his labor. There were no farmers within 20 miles who hired help because practically all of them were in Jeter's condition, some of them even in a worse one. Nor were there any lumber mills or turpentine stills anywhere near the tobacco road that would employ him. The only job in the surrounding county was the one at the coal chute, and Love had held it since the Augusta and Georgia and Southern Railroad was first built. Even if Jeter could have taken the job away from Love, the work would have been too hard for him to do. Filling the big iron scoops all day long and rolling them to the edge of the structure where they were dumped into the engine tenders required a strong back and stronger arms. Love could do the work because he had become accustomed to doing it. For Jeter to attempt such a hard labor in the weakened condition he was in would have been foolish, even if the railroad would have hired him. The hope that he would find Tom was Jeter's sustaining strength. Behind his hopeful belief that Tom would give him some money lay his fear of dying without a suit of clothes to be buried in. He had developed a growing horror of dying in overalls. Ada, too, talked a lot about getting close to dying. She wanted a silk dress, and it mattered little to her whether the color was red or black, so as long as it was stylish in length. Ada had a dress she had been keeping several years to die in, but she constantly worried or feared that the dress might not be the correct length. One year it was stylish to have dresses one length, and the next year they were mysteriously lengthened or shortened several inches. It had been impossible for her to keep up with the changes. Consequently, even though she had a dress to put away, she still tried to make Jeter promise to buy her a new one that would be in style and keeping with the times when she would die. Ada believed she would die almost any day. She was usually surprised to wake up in the morning and discover that she was still alive. The pellagra that was slowly squeezing the life from her emaciated body was a lingering death. The old grandmother had pellagra too, but somehow she would not die. Her frail body struggled day after day with the disease, but except for the slow withering of her skin and flesh, no one was able to say when she would die. She weighed only 72 pounds now. Once she had been a large woman, and she had weighed 200 pounds 20 years before. Jeter was angry with her because she persisted in living, and he would not let her have any food when he could keep her from eating. However, she had learned how to find her own means of sustenance, such as it was. How she did it, no one knew. Sometimes she would boil leaves and roots. At other times, she would eat wild grass and flowers in the fields. Jeter had already given implicit instructions regarding his own burial. He had impressed both upon Ada and Love the importance and necessity of carrying out his plans. He expected to outlive Ada, but in the case he should be killed in his automobile, he had made a promise to buy him a suit of clothes. If that was impossible, she was to go to the fuller and ask some of the merchants to give her an old suit for him. Love, too, had had to swear that he would see that Jeter was buried in a suit of clothes instead of in his overalls. But there was another thing connected with his death that was of equal importance. Jeter had a horror of rats. That was strange because he had lived with them around him all his life, and he knew their ways almost as well as he did those of men. His reason for hating rats was because of an incident that happened when his father died while Jeter was a young man. The old Lester had died in the same house Jeter now occupied, and he was buried on the following day. That night, while Jeter and the other men were sitting up with the body, someone had suggested that they all go to Fuller and get some Coca-Colas and tobacco. They were to sit up all night, and they had felt the need of something to drink and something to smoke. As all the men, including Jeter, had wanted to go to Fuller, they had put the body in the corn crib and locked the door. The crib was the only place on the farm where anything could be locked up and found intact later. Negroes and white men had a habit of coming by the Lester house during the night and carrying away anything that had been left unprotected. None of the doors of the house had locks on them, but the crib door did have a lock. The men had placed the body inside, locked the door, and put the key away, and had driven to the Fuller for the Coca-Colas and tobacco. They returned to the house about 3 or 4 hours later. As soon as the mules were unhitched from the buggies and tied to the wagon wheels for the rest of the night, the men unlocked the crib door, lifted out the wooden box, and carried it back into the house. The remainder of the night was spent in watching the casket, drinking Coca-Colas, and smoking and chewing tobacco. The following afternoon at the funeral, just as the casket was about to be lowered into the grave, the top was lifted off in order for the family and friends might take a last look at the deceased. The lid was turned back, and just as it was fully opened, a large corn-crib rat jumped out and disappeared into the woods. Nobody knew how the rat had gotten inside until someone found a hole in the bottom of the wooden box where the rat had gnawed through while it was locked in the crib. One by one, the people filed past the casket, and each time it became the next person's turn to look at the body, a strange look came over his face. Some of the women giggled, and the men grinned at each other. Jeter ran to the side of the box and saw what had happened. The rat had eaten away nearly all of the left side of his father's face and neck. Jeter closed the lid and had the box lowered into the grave immediately. He had never forgotten that day. Now that the time was coming when he would soon die, Jeter had become more insistent than ever that his body was not to be put into a corn crib or left where the rats could reach it. Love had promised faithfully to see that the rats did not get to him before he was buried. "You gotta swear to me you won't let me be left in the box where the rats can get me," Jeter said dozens of times. "I declare before the Lord God, Love, that ain't a fit way to treat the dead. I've regretted my own father's circumstances every day since that happened, and I declare before the Lord, I sure don't want that thing to happen to me when I'm dead and can't do nothing about it." "You don't need to worry about nothing," Love said. "I'll dig a hole and put you right in after you're gone. I won't wait for the next day, even. I'll put you in the ground the same hour you die almost. I'll take care of your body, don't you worry none. Just don't put the coffin in that darn corn crib, Love, no matter what else you do. There ain't no rats staying in there now since I had the corn in it for nearly 5 years, but they'll take trips back here every once in a while from the place they're staying at now, just to make sure there ain't been no corn put in it. Before they left, they set up mule collars and everything else they could get hold of. They was that mad at me for not putting corn in there for them. I used to bust them on the head with sticks, but that didn't stop them from coming back every once in a while. I was in there not so long ago getting some corn cobs, and one of them bit my leg before I could get out. They sure got it good and heavy for me because I don't put no corn in there for them to eat up." Datu had promised Jeter to see that his body would not be left exposed to the rats that he hated so much, but Jeter did not worry as much as he did Love, because he believed he would outlive her by several years. Ada looked as if she might die before Jeter did. Her teeth had all dropped out. She had dipped snuff since she was 8 years old. Her teeth had not lasted very long after she was married. Her one concern, besides the constant desire for more snuff, was with her own teeth. The thought that she might not have a stylish dress when she died was bothering her night and day. She did not trust Jeter any too much to furnish it when the time came. That was the reason she kept the old dress put away to be used in case of a more up-to-date one was not bought for her. "If I could find out where my daughters was living, maybe they would help me get a stylish dress to die in," she said. "Lizzie Bell used to love her old ma a lot. I know she'd help me if I could find out where she's at. And Clara might help me some, too. She used to tell me how pretty I looked when I combed my hair in the mornings and put a clean apron and sunbonnet. I don't know if any others would want to help none or not. It's been such a long time since I saw the rest of them, I've just about forgot what they was like. Seems like I can't recall all their names even sometime." "Lizzie Bell might be making a lot of money over in the mills," Jeter had said. "Maybe if we was to find her and ask her about it, she might come sometime and bring us a little money. I know Bailey would bring us some snuff and rations if I know where to find him. Bailey was just about the best of all the boys. He was good to me even when he was just a little boy. He was never stealing all the molasses we had saved for supper like the rest of them. I expect maybe he's got to be a pretty big merchant somewheres by now. He always said he was going to make a lot of money so he wouldn't have to go barefooted in the wintertime like Tom and Clara did when they went away." Ada talked to Jeter whenever the subject was that of their children away from home. It seems as if she were not interested enough in other things to talk about from. She answered Jeter's questions most of the time, and she scolded them when there was nothing in the house to eat. The rest of the time, she had very little to say, but whenever Bailey's name, or Lizzie Bell's, or Clara's, or Walker's, or any of the children was mentioned, she lost the hollow look in her eyes and wanted to talk about them for the rest of the day. None of the children who had left home had ever come back to visit, nor had they ever sent a message. Because Ada and Jeter had never received one, they believed that all of the children were alive. There was no way of knowing whether they were dead or not. I'm going over to Burke County and see Tom, Jeter told Ada. I made up my mind that I'll go over there and see him before I die. Everybody in Fuller tells me he's hauling cross ties off the camp by the wagon, load day and night. They say he's got a whooping big cross-tie camp over there. From what people say about him, I reckon he's a powerful rich man. He sure ought to give me some money. Though it sometimes looks like a rich man will never help the poor, whereas the poor people will give away everything they has to help somebody who ain't got nothing. That's how it looks to me. Don't seem like it ought to be that way, but I reckon the rich ain't got no time to fool with us poor folks. When you see Tom, tell him that his old ma would like powerful much to see him. You tell him that I said that he was near about the best of the whole 17. Claire and Lizzie Bell was about the best, I reckon, but Tom and Billy led the boys when it came to being good children. You tell Tom I said he was the best of them, and maybe he'll send me some money for a stylish dress. Pearl is the prettiest, Jeter said. Ain't none of the other girls got pretty yellow hair like she has, nor them pale blue eyes either. She's the first lister I ever saw who had yellow hair. It's funny about her having it, ain't it, Ada? Pearl is my favorite, I reckon, Ada said. I wish she would come to see me sometimes. I ain't seen her since she left last summer to get married alive. I'm going to tell Tom he ought to give me some money, Jeter said. The folks in Fuller say he's a powerful rich man. You better not forget to mention to him that his old ma sure would like for him to get her a stylish dress to die in. I know he won't stand back with a little of his money for a little thing like that. I'm going to mention it to him when I see him, but I don't know how he'll take it. I expect he's got a wife and a raft of children to provide for. Maybe he'll give it to me, though. Reckon Tom has got some children. Maybe some. I sure would like to see him. I know he must have a whole lot of grandchildren somewhere. I'm bound to have, with all them boys and girls off from me. If I could see Tom, maybe I wouldn't mind it so bad that I can't see the rest of them. I just know I ought to have grandchildren somewhere in this country. Lizzie Bell and Clara has got a raft of children, I reckon. They was always talking about having them, and they say over in Fuller that Lizzie Bell has got a lot of them. I don't know how other folks know more about such things than I do. Looks like I ought to be the one who knows the most about my children. Maybe you could get Tom to bring his children over here for me to see. You tell him I want to see my grandchildren, and maybe he'll consent to bring them. Ada had talked several times about Tom bringing his children to see her. Every time Jeter said anything about going over to Burke County, where Tom's cross-tie camp was, she reminded him not to forget to tell Tom what she had said. But from year to year, as Jeter failed to start, she had become less inclined to talk about the possibility of seeing any of the grandchildren. Jeter could not get started. He would say he was going the next day, but he always put off the trip at the last minute. Jeter made a false start somewhere nearly every day. He was going to Fuller, or was going to the McCoy, or he was going to Augusta, but he never went when he said he would. If he told Ada at night that he was going to McCoy early the next morning, he would decide at the last minute to go to Fuller or Augusta instead. Usually, he would have to stop or walk out over the old cotton fields and look at the tall brown broom sedge that made him think about something else. When he did walk out into the sedge, the chances were that he would lie down and take a nap. It was a wonder how he ever got the wood cut that he hauled to Augusta. Sometimes it took him a whole week to cut just enough blackjack for a load. Just then, it was the beginning of the new season that was causing him to change his mind so frequently. The smell of the burning broom sedge and the pine undergrowth was in the air every day now. Some of the land was even being broken away off in the distance, and he could detect the aroma of freshly turned earth miles away. The smell of newly turned earth that others were never conscious of reached Jeter's nostrils with a more pungent odor than anyone else could ever detect in the air. That made him want to go out right away and burn over the old cotton fields and plant a crop. Other men were doing that all around him, but even if he succeeded in borrowing a mule, Jeter did not know where to begin begging for a credit to buy seed cotton and guano. The merchants in Fuller had heard his plea so many times that they knew what he was going to ask for as soon as he walked in the door. And before he could say the first word, they were shaking their heads and going back to where he could not follow them. He did not know what to do about it. Jeter postponed nearly everything a man could think of. But when it came to plowing the land and planting cotton, he was as persistent as any man could be about such things. He started out each day with his youth enthusiasm at fever pitch, and by night he was still as determined as ever to find a mule he could borrow and a merchant who would give him credit for seed cotton and guano. All right, this is chapter 9 of Tobacco Road by Erskine and Caldwell. The sun had been up only half an hour when Bessie reached the Lester house on the morning after her sudden departure. She had said that when she was going home to ask God to let her marry Dude. Jeter had not expected her to come back for several days. No one was in the sight as she crossed the yard and ran through the front door calling Dude. Dude, you dude, where is you, dude? She called. Jeter was just getting out of bed, and when he first heard her, she ran into the bedroom while he sat on a chair pulling on his shoes. "What you want with Dude, Bessie?" he asked sleepily. "What do you want Dude for?" Bessie ran around the room looking into the beds. There were 3 beds in which all the Lesters slept. Dot and Jeter used one of them, Ellie Mae and the grandmother another, and Dude slept alone. Ellie Mae sat up in bed, awakened by the disturbance, and rubbed her eyes. Bessie jerked back the quilts on Dude's bed and ran into the next room where the roof had fallen in. It was the other bedroom, the room where most of the children had formerly slept, and it had been deserted because one section of the roof had rotted away. It was filled with plunder. Bessie came back and looked under Adele's bed. "What did you want with Dude this time of day, Bessie?" Jeter asked. She still did not stop to answer Jeter's questions. She ran through the kitchen calling Dude at the top of her voice. As soon as he could lace his shoes and put on his jumper, Jeter followed her out into the backyard. His drooping black felt hat was on his head, because his hat was the first thing he put on in the morning and the last thing he took off at night. Dude was drawing a bucket of water at the well, and Bessie reached him before he could tip the bucket and get a drink. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed his face excitedly. Dude fought back at first, but as soon as he saw it was Bessie, he smiled at her and put his arms around her waist. Jeter went closer and watched them. Presently, Bessie took a side comb from her head and began combing Dude's stiff black hair and smoothing it down with the palms of her hands. Dude's hair was coarse and bristly, and it stood straight to the ends, no matter how much it was combed and brushed. Sometimes he could manage to make it lie down for a few minutes by sousing his head in a pan of water and combing it hurriedly. But as soon as the water began to dry, the hair would stand straight up again as if it were attached to springs. Dude's hair was as wiry as hog bristles. "I never seen a woman preacher carrying on over a young sapling like that before," Jeter said. What you want to do that to do for, Bessie? You and him is hugging and rubbing off each other just like you was yesterday on the front porch." Bessie smiled at Dude and Jeter. She leaned against the well stand and tucked up her hair. She had not waited that morning to pin it up. "Me and Dude is going to get married," she said. "The Lord told me to do it. I asked him about it, and he said, 'Sister Bessie, Dude Lester is the man I want you to make. Get up early in the morning and go up to the Lester place and marry Dude the first thing.' That's what he said to me last night, the very words I heard with my own ears while I was praying about it in bed. So when the sun came up, I got out of bed and ran up here as fast as I could because the Lord don't like to be kept waiting for his plan to be carried out. He wants me to marry Dude right now." Dude looked around nervously as if he was thinking of trying to run off to the woods and hide. He had forgotten how anxious he had been to go home with Bessie the evening before when she first mentioned marriage. "You hear that, Dude?" Jeter said. "What do you think about doing it with Sister Bessie?" "Shucks," he said. "I couldn't do that." "Why can't you do that?" Jeter demanded. "What's ailing you? Ain't you man enough yet?" "Maybe I is, maybe I ain't. I'd be scared to do that with her." "Why, Dude?" his father said. "That ain't nothing to be afraid about. Bessie ain't gonna hurt you. She knows how to treat you. Sister Bessie there has been married before. She's a widow woman now. She knows all about how to treat men." "I wouldn't hurt you none, Dude," she said, putting her arm around his neck and drawing his arms tighter around her waist. "There ain't nothing to be scared of. I'm just like your sister Ellie Mae and your ma. Women don't scare their men folks none. You'll like being married to me because I know how to treat men fine." Ada elbowed her way past Jeter and Dude. She had not waited to plait her hair when she heard what Bessie wanted. She stood beside Dude and Bessie with her hair divided over the front of her shoulders, plaiting one side and tying a string around the end, and then the beginning of the other braid. She was as excited as Bessie was. "Bessie," she said, "you'll have to make Dude wash his feet every once in a while, because if you don't, he'll dirty up your quilts. Sometimes he don't wash himself all winter long, and the quilts get that dirty you don't know how to go about cleaning of them. Dude is just careless like his pa. I had the hardest time learning him to wear his socks in bed, because it was the only way I could keep the quilts clean. He would never wash himself. I reckon Dude is just going to be the same way his pa done, so maybe you had better make Dude wear his socks too." Ellie Mae had come out of the house and was standing behind the chinaberry tree in order to hear and see what was taking place beside the well stand. The grandmother was in the yard too, and she was peering from behind the corner of the house lest anyone should see her and make her go away. "Maybe you and Dude will help me get a stylish dress," Ada suggested shyly. "You and him know how bad I want a dress of the right length to die in. I've long ago give up waiting for Jeter to get me one. He ain't gonna do it in time." All of them stood by the well looking at each other. When Jeter caught Dude's eye, Dude hung up his head and looked at the ground. He did not know what to think about it. He wanted to get married, but he was afraid of Bessie. She was nearly 25 years older than he was. "Do you know what I'm going to do, Jeter?" Bessie asked. "What?" Jeter said. "I'm going to buy me a new automobile." "A new automobile?" "A brand new one. I'm going to Fuller right now and get it." A brand new one? Jeter said unbelievingly. A sure enough brand new automobile? Dude's mouth dropped open and his eyes glistened. What, you gonna buy it with? Bessie, Jeter asked. Is you got money? I've got $800 to pay for it with. My former husband left me that money when he died. He had it in insurance, and when he died, I got it and put it in the bank in Augusta. I aim to use it in carrying on the prayer and preaching my former husband used to like so much. I always did want a brand new automobile. When you going to buy a new automobile? Jeter asked. Right now, today. I'm going over to Fuller and get it right now. Me and Dude's going to use it to travel all over the country, preaching and praying. Can I drive it? Dude asked. That's what I'm buying it for, dude. I'm getting it for you to drive us around and when we take notion to go somewheres. When is you and Dude going to do all this riding around and praying and preaching? Jeter said. Is you going to get married before or after? Right away, she said. We'll walk over to the Fuller right now and buy the new automobile and then ride up to the courthouse and get married. Is he going to leave out the country to get married? He asked doubtfully, or is he just going to live along without it? I'm going to get the license for marriage, she said. That costs about $2, Jeter reminded. Is you got $2? Dude, he ain't got nothing. I ain't asking Dude for 1 penny of money. I'll attend to that part myself. I've got $800 in the bank and some more besides. I saved my money for something just like this to happen. I've been looking for it to happen all along. Dude had been dropping pebbles into the well for the past few minutes. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at Bessie. He looked straight into her face, and the sight of the two's cavernous, round nostrils brought him a smile to his lips. He had looked at her nose before, but this time the hole seemed to be larger and rounder than ever. It was more like looking into a double-barrel shotgun than ever before. He could not keep from laughing. What are you laughing at, dude? She asked. At them 2 holes in your face, he said. I ain't never seen nobody with all the top of her nose gone away like that before. Bessie's face turned white. She hung her head in an effort to hide the exposed nostrils as much as possible. She was sensitive about her appearance, but she knew of no way to remedy her nose. She had been born without a bone in it, and after nearly 40 years, it had still not been developed. She put her hand over her face. I'm ashamed of you, dude, she said, wiping the tears from the corners of her eyes. You know I can't help the way I look. I've been like that ever since I can remember. Won't no nose grow on me, I reckon. Dude dug the toes of his shoes in the sand and tried to laugh, but almost as suddenly as he had first looked at Bessie's face and broken into a smile, he stopped and scowled meanly at himself. It was the remembrance of his new automobile that made him stop laughing at Bessie. If she was going to buy a brand new car, he did not care how she looked. It would have been all right with him if she had had a hair lip of Ellie Mae's. Now that he could ride all he wanted to, he had never driven a new motor car, and that was something he wanted to do more than anything else he could think of. I didn't mean no harm, he said uneasily. Honest to God, I didn't. I don't give a damn how your nose looks. Bessie smiled again and put her arms around his waist. She looked up at him again, her face so close to his that he could feel her breath. He had to stop trying to see down into her nose because it hurt his eyes and made them ache, to focus on an object only a few inches away. Her nostrils were only a dark blur on her face when they were standing so close together. Can I drive the new automobile? Sure enough, he asked again, hoping he had not made her change her mind. Is he going to let me drive it? That's why I'm getting it, dude. I'm getting it for you to drive all over the country in. Me and you is going to get married, and we can ride all the time if we want to. I won't stop you from going somewhere when you want to go. You can ride all the time. Will it have a horn on it? I reckon it will. Don't all automobiles come with horns already on them? Maybe so, he said. You be sure and find out if it's got one when you buy it anyway. It won't be no good at all unless it's got a horn. Dude is pretty darn lucky, Jeter said. I didn't get a darn thing when I married Ada. She didn't have nothing but some old dresses of her own, and her people was that darn poor. They had to eat meal and fatback just like we do now. I didn't get nothing when I married her except a mess of trouble. Ada walked over to Bessie and laid her hand on Bessie's arm. Maybe if you got all that money, Bessie, you and Dude could buy me a jar of snuff in Fuller. Reckon you can do that for Dude's old ma? Being that Dude is my boy, you ought to get me just a little jar of snuff anyway. I shall be powerful pleased if you was to get 3 or 4 jars while you was about it, though. Snuff jars away the pains in my poor stomach when I can't get nothing to eat. I've been needing a new pair of overalls for the longest time, Bessie, Jeter said. I declare, I'm almost scared to go far piece from the house anymore because I don't know what my clothes will drop right off of me sometime when I ain't noticing. If you could give me a new pair of Fuller, I'd be powerful pleased. Bessie led Dude away from the well. They walked around the house, and when nobody was looking, she stood behind him and hugged him so hard he could not breathe until she released him. What are you doing that to me for? He said. I ain't never had that done to me before. Me and you is gonna get married, Dude. Don't you know that? He walked around behind her, looked at the back of her head, and came back to the front again. When is you going to get a new automobile? He asked. Right away, dude. We're going to Fuller right now and get it. Dude was more excited over the prospect of driving a new automobile than he had ever been about anything in his whole life. The automobiles he had seen all had been old ones like Jeter's, except the ones the rich people in Augusta drove. He could not make himself believe that he was actually going to drive one, like those he had seen in the city. He wanted to start for Fuller without another minute's delay. Come on, he said. We ain't got no time to lose. Ain't you glad we was gonna get married, though, she said. It's gonna be real nice, ain't it, dude? The rest of the Lesters had followed them to the front yard, and they stood by the corner of their house waiting to see Dude and Bessie leave for Fuller. Ellie Mae followed them down the road for about half a mile before she turned around and came back to the house. Dude walked in front, and Bessie followed him several yards behind. When they reached the top of the first sandhill, they stopped and looked back at the Lester house to see if Ada and Jeter were watching them. Bessie waved her hand until Dude told her to hurry up so they could get to Fuller. The long walk to Fuller took them nearly 2 hours because Bessie had to stop several times and rest beside the road. The sun was hot by that time, and it was nearly 10 o'clock when they left the Lester place, and it was difficult walking through deep sand, especially for Bessie. In some places, the sand was a foot deep, and her feet sank down so far that the sand ran down her shoe tops. Dude would never sit down and wait for Bessie to get ready to start walking again. He waited several feet away, urging her to hurry. Dude had started out walking slowly enough for Bessie to keep up with him, but as they got closer to Fuller, Dude could not hold himself back. He ran ahead several hundred yards, and then had to walk back to meet Bessie. He would have gone on to town without her, but he did not know what to do when he got there. He was afraid, too, that if he got out of Bessie's sight, she might turn around and go back without buying the new automobile. Neither of them talked the whole time. Bessie hummed a hymn to herself occasionally, raising a note to the shrill pitch she liked so much, but she did not try to talk to Dude. They were too engrossed in their own thoughts to talk.